Hello everyone. In today's video, we will be showcasing how to track 3D cameras into 2D footage. This is basically your camera tracking options for After Effects. So for this, I brought in a short clip of a camera panning across, not panning, tracking across a garage and panning around just a little bit. So you can see it's a very short clip. So to do this, what the program is going to do is it's going to analyze the footage and start selecting points that it constantly sees throughout the footage. And those points will be tracked. The motion for those points will be tracked throughout that footage. And then it will give you the ability to select those points to create a pseudo 3D plane that will be superimposed onto the footage, therefore giving you what looks like actual integration of 3D elements into that 2D footage. With that said, what it's going to do is to do this, I'll select that layer, and then I'll go, instead of using track motion, I'll use track camera. Now, what the camera is going to do, what the program is doing is analyzing that footage, like I said. So you need to have really high resolution footage and preferably very clean and good contrast in the footage. It will try to track anything you give to it, but to get the best results, you want to have good contrast and good color separation in your footage in order to be able to get the best tracking available. Now, what that does, it gives you these points that have been tracked, and if I scrub the video, you'll notice that the points keep on being tracked. New points appear, some others disappear, and that means that the program loses the tracking ability for those that disappear, and new points that appear, it will go ahead and retain. Now, what we want to do is look for a good set of points that are constantly available within the footage as I scrub. And so as I scrub down here, I notice that the ones here on the floor, this two over here, this red one, these ones back here, remain pretty stable, as well as these two over here. Let me go back, and you'll notice that they actually remain pretty steady. So what I want to do is I want to maintain those, I want to choose those. You'll notice that as I roll over the triangles, the program doesn't know which plane I'm trying to track. And it's trying to create a pseudo plane, like I said earlier, for me to say, okay, so this is the plane that you're trying to track. To do that, it triangulates between those points that it has tracked. It says, okay, is this what you want? And if so, that is the center point for tracking, that little red dot, if I were to choose these three right here. So, or if I were to choose these three, that would be my center point. Now, you are allowed to move that center point to whatever you want, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. First things first, you don't want to track these things and only select 3 points. That is a good point to start. But what you really want is you want to get as many points within the plane that you're trying to track in order to be able to get the best results. So for example, if I were to select these 3 points right here, by clicking on the plane when it appears, I've selected that point there, this point here, and this point here. Now, if I want to add more points to this track, I'll go identify which ones I do want to track. So for example, this one here. So I'll press Shift on the keyboard and click on that, and that expanded my plane. Then I want to do this one as well over here. Boom. And so that gives me a good, pretty big panel, a pretty big plane space. And when I roll over that little red dot, let's increase its size by going to target size here in the filter so we can see it better. This has no effect on how that is rendered, by the way. So increasing this is just for us to see how big, to actually see the center point of the 3D plane that I'm trying to create and how it fits within the world. So if I click by going over it, and you'll notice that my mouse changes into those arrows. When I roll over it, if I click and drag, you will notice that it is basically behaving as if it was on the actual floor, and that's exactly what I want. So with that, now I can go ahead and place it wherever I want my world to be, the center of that world to be, and I want it to be around here. That's where I want anything that is done in 3D in this composition. I want to be using that point of reference as the origin. So to do so, what I need to do is, once I have placed that target where I want it to go, where I want the center of the world to go, I want to right click it, and then from the flyout menu, I want to choose Set Ground Plane and Origin. What this does is basically says to the program, or to the composition, that plane that I have selected with my anchor points, that's what I want to be my actual ground plane. And my origin should be right at this point. So that is for reference in terms of the actual plane of reference to the camera, and the origin will go at that center of that circle. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and it doesn't really do anything other than tell the program this is where I want things to be based from. This is my point of reference for the beginning, for the origin of the world. So with that done, I want to go ahead and right click on it again, and then I have choices as to what I want to add to this composition. So my workflow usually starts with creating a null and a camera. I can go ahead and create text and a camera, solid and a camera, null and a camera, shadow catcher. I mean, all these things are available to you. The reason why we want to create something and a camera is because the something will tell us where, if that center of the world is aligned to what we expected, the way we expect it to be to the camera. The second thing is the camera itself is the tracker, the actual information that the program is feeding back to us by having tracked those points. The camera that it imagined moved around in real life when the video was being shot and how it was moved, and that information that then I can use to see other true 3D elements that I can bring in from either Cinema4D or other programs. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and create a null and a camera. Now my null comes in really tiny. It's right there in the center. Let me go ahead and select that null object, and I'm going to scale it up significantly to see if it's aligned. And as you can see, it actually came out pretty well. Sometimes that might not align as well. And if you run into that issue, what you want to do is you want to undo the step. So you want to undo to delete the track, the null and the camera. You don't want to undo as far back as to lose the 3D tracker. You don't want to track this again. If you run into the issue of, let's say your null object was pointing towards the wall or it was sideways, then you might want to undo all the way to here, select your camera tracker, filter in the effects window, and go back and simply select new tracking points until you get what you're looking for. Now, in my experience, it is best to start from the beginning. So always make sure you bring your time marker all the way to the beginning again. And then simply go back and select the points that you've identified are the best points to track within the footage. So let's say that was the plane that I was trying to track. Let me move this and position it where I want it to go. Right click on that, set ground plane and origin again, right click, and then go ahead and say, okay, I want a null and a camera. Now let's see what the result of the null tracking this time is. And you'll see that it tracked pretty much the same way the previous one did. So that's a good tracking setting. Like I said, if you don't see the alignment, the way you see the alignment is by looking at that pivot gizmo, those arrows. Make sure that whatever arrow is pointing in that direction, in our case, the y-axis, is actually pointing, according to how the camera would be seeing it. The z-axis is obviously up, and the x-axis is pointing, parallel to any lines or anything where your camera was shooting from. You just need to look at your footage. Imagine if that was an actual element. Would your camera see it the way you're seeing it right now on the floor? That's the question you need to answer. And if the answer is no, then go back and retrack. So with this done, I have enough information now to actually do what I want to do with this, which is I want to bring in a 3D element into this composition. The 3D element, the 3D layer is going to come from Cinema4D. Cinema4D is a full-blown 3D program that comes bundled with After Effects. So to open up Cinema4D, you will go under File, New, and then create a new Cinema4D file. Or you would go under Layer, New, Cinema4D file. Either one of the two will get you the same result. Now what that's going to do is going to tell you, okay, what do you want to call this file? So the first thing you want to do is give it a name. I'm going to replace this file here. That's a nothing file right now. It doesn't have anything. And as you see, it's called untitled. You can call it whatever you want. And then click Save. Now I'm going to replace mine. It's going to open up Cinema4D for me. And I'm going to say, this window here is basically telling you, hey, you're using Cinema4D Lite. That is the program that is bundled with After Effects. If you want to use the full Cinema4D version that you have, if you have it, you can always connect the program. Once you fire up After Effects, just simply say yes, and it will find your Cinema4D file. You just have to actually connect it, and that's it. If you don't, don't click yes, because it's going to ask you to download the trial version of the full version of Cinema 4D, and that might not be what you want. Right now, you actually do have the program. If you have After Effects installed on your machine, you have the program installed as well, the light version of the program. And for our purposes, that's more than enough. So what we want to do is, in this case, I'm going to say no. And then this opens up the Cineware filter, creates a new layer called Untitled Cinema 4D, and then it will open up Cinema 4D for me. Now, in my case, I already had Cinema 4D open. So if you run into an issue where the program is not opening up, my advice is, and this is a very common issue, especially if you don't have the proper drivers, graphics drivers set up, you might run into issues of Cinema 4D crashing. When it opens up, it tells you, oh, there's an error, and it closes, and you cannot get it open no matter what you try. What I do in those cases is I go ahead and close After Effects. Then I go ahead and open up the Cinema 4D file. It's already been created. When I created it, if I go to my folder, there it is, Untitled C4D. That's the file that I just created. So when I close After Effects, I double click that Untitled C4D, or whatever name you gave it, C4D, double click it, and it will open up Cinema 4D Lite for you. And it will open up seamlessly. Once that's done, then you can go ahead and open After Effects, and the file that you're looking at in Cinema 4D now is that actual file in After Effects. So now you are connected. So basically, it's almost like a reverse workflow where you open up first the 3D program and then open up the compositing program. In this case, this is saying, hey, this project's already open. Do you want to open it with the same name and title? I'll say, yes, please. Or no, if I don't want to open it. Then if I say no, basically the file is open. There it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and, let's see, this is saying that the file is actually open, and it is. So what I want to do now is I want to go back to After Effects, make sure that things match. Let me go ahead and say, hey, double click that guy, sorry, Control E to edit it, and see if it's actually going to open Cinema 4D. There it is, Entitled C4D. And what's going to happen is going to tell me, okay, what do you want to do in this file? So you could either import objects from Cinema 4D or from any other 3D program that you worked on. For example, if you work on Maya or 3ds Max or something like that, you can export the files as an FXB format or as an OBJ format, and they will import seamlessly into this program. One thing to keep in mind, though, is this. When we create a composition in After Effects and we want to add a 3D layer to it, you'll notice that that layer came way shorter than my composition is. So I need to go back to my project window, select the composition, and take note of the settings for the composition. In my case, this is 1280 by 720. It's 131 frames long, and it's 24 FPS. Now, if you're not seeing frames, you want to go to your SEMT code in your timeline, and you want to press the Control key and click on that SEMT code to change it to frames. The reason for that is because Cinema 4D doesn't measure SEMT code, it measures frames. So I know that I need 130 frames available coming in from Cinema 4D. I need them to come in at 24 FPS, and my size is 1280 by 720. So with that information, I'll go back to Cinema 4D, and on the settings here, as soon as I open the project, or if you lose that window by any chance, if you lose this window, say for example, you clicked on something else and something happened and this window went away, go ahead and go to Edit, Project Settings, and it will open it up for you again. Here you change your FPS to 24 FPS. You will change your maximum time to 131 frames. Same with the preview time, 131 frames, so that they match. And that's all the changes you need to make here. Then go to the Render dropdown at the top, and then go to Edit Render Settings. Here you make sure that you're exporting at 1280 by 720 or whatever size matches that composition in After Effects, and then change your frame rate here to 24. Hit the Return key or Enter key, and then close this. So with that done, this file will be now matching the settings. Once I save it, it will match the settings of my composition in After Effects. So let's go ahead and file, save really quick. And when I go back to After Effects, you'll notice that I now have extra frames to stretch. So I can go ahead and stretch. So now I know that I am controlling that layer from the file that I have open in Cinema 4D. So with that done, what I want to do at this point is I want to bring in information from other files. Now, this tutorial is not to show you how to create 3D elements inside Cinema 4D. This is for those of you who have taken 3D classes. If you've taken my Maya class or any of the other classes that we offer in 3D, this will be very familiar to you, this environment. So it's literally a skip of stone for you to be able to get acquainted with it and get moving really fast. For now, I have pre-created a file and I'm going to merge it into this document. So I'm going to merge that project, and I think it's this guy right here. It's the one I had worked on. Let me actually bring in this one, primitives. No, let me bring this guy. Cinema4D, boom. And so what this is going to bring in, it's going to bring in a model of a car with some lights that I had already preset. And actually this has a camera that I don't need. So I'll delete that camera for now. And that basically becomes the file that I'm working on. So I'll go ahead and say File, Save Project. And when I go back to After Effects, I should see that car showing up here momentarily. Now, if your image goes blank, just go ahead and scrub the video really quick. And if it doesn't work, like in my case, go back to the actual Cinema 4D layer, go to the Effects window, and switch your renderer from Software to a Standard Draft or Standard Final. And you should see the model appear in your screen. Now, you'll notice that my model is kind of off, not compared to the position of my null object. So I want to make sure that that model is actually matching the position of the null object, because what I'm using right now is the Cinema 4D camera. Basically what I'm seeing is what I was seeing before, which is that grid that was all over the place. So let's go back to Standard Draft, and then I'll switch my camera under the Cineware settings from Cinema 4D camera to either Center Comp Camera or Comp Camera. In my experience, 99% of the time, Comp Camera is the one that works. So if I click on that, boom, now it's aligned, now it's positioned where it should be. And if I scrub my video, my 3D object should follow along, responding to the position of my camera. So if I were to play this back, let me go ahead and create a short preview. You will notice that now the object is integrated into the footage and it's rotating as my camera arches around the front of the car. You will also notice that it's pretty bad quality. And part of the reason for that is because the file, the way I'm looking at it right now, it's in draft mode. But now I know that this is appropriate, that it's responding appropriately to my camera position. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop the preview for just a second, and I'm going to switch from Standard Draft to Final Draft. Now that should bring up all of the light and shadow that comes with from the Cinema 4D file, and a better quality for the overall scene. Now, your task is to figure out where the lights are in this composition, the light that's coming from back here and the light that's coming from the the right-hand side of the car, that is influencing the way this car is lit. In my case, my light seems to be coming from the front, so I need to match the lights on this scene. To do so, I'll go back to Cinema 4D and I'll place this lights in different spots. So let me move this light by using the move tool and using those arrows the same way I do in After Effects. I'm gonna move it to this side. We rotate my scene. The way I'm rotating my scene is by pressing the Alt key on the keyboard and clicking and dragging the same way that I would my camera in After Effects. And then I'm gonna rotate that light by using the rotate tool up here. I will constrain it to that circle right there, and I'm gonna be bringing it to point down slightly. And let's go ahead and get closer to this and see what this is looking like. Now, as you can see, I have no idea what this is gonna look like on my Cinema 4D file. So I mean on my After Effects file, because I have no way of seeing how this is rendering, nor do I know how my camera is looking at it. I am trying to guess where the camera is. So what I'll do right now is I'll go ahead and save this file for now, I'll go back to After Effects. I'll see the changes in light momentarily. There they are. But I would like to have this camera information inside Cinema 4D. And so to do so, what I want to do is once I have selected my standard final or standard draft, I have the ability to export that camera information to Cinema 4D. And so the way to do that is by selecting the actual file, making sure that you're in the Cineware setup with the standard final or standard draft option selected, and then go to merge. Now, what that's going to do is going to send the camera information. It's going to ask me first to save it. So I'll go ahead and save this file, file save. And I'll save this project as 3D Tracking 2. For now, I'll just replace that one. I'll replace that file. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to export it. Now, what this did is it's going to send that camera information into Cinema 4D, into the actual project. So I'll click OK on that, and I'll go back to Cinema 4D. By default, you see that I don't see a new camera appearing in my Cinema 4D file. The way to bring the camera in is by going into File, closing the project. You had already saved it before we went back to After Effects. Then going back and open Project, and open the project again, which is the file we were working on. It's called Untitled, right? There it is. So I'll click Open, and there's the file, and here's my camera from After Effects. So if I scrub the timeline here, I'll see the camera moving around the car. If I want to see the world through that camera to see what this is looking like, I can go to the Cameras tab up here in my viewport and choose Use Camera, a 3D Tracker camera. You'll see now that I'm seeing the world as if I was seeing it in After Effects. Furthermore, if I wanted to see how this is going to render in After Effects, I can always go into my rendering button down here, my drop down, choose Interactive Render Region, and this is going to render inside Cinema 4D the final quality of what my camera is seeing in that region. You can make that region smaller or bigger, but all I need it for is just to see how my light is influencing the actual model. So that's telling me that this light here that I have selected is pretty faint, and that's okay, but I also need some influence light from this side, so I need to create a new light source. I also want to have this light perhaps a little bit more, a bit stronger, this light back here. So let me switch my tool to the Move tool, select this. Let's place that there for now. Yeah, that's fine. And let me go ahead and switch my camera back again to my default camera so that I can rotate around to be able to select my different elements. Okay. And if you are unable to select your objects because of the rendering settings, basically it seems like it's stuck with that, you can always use this list over here, your outliner in Maya, to be able to select the different elements within the scene. I noticed that this light is actually pointing away from my object. I just noticed that. So let me get close to it or farther away depending on what I want. If I want to make a copy of this light here, I'll select it here. Go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. Then I can move it across the other way. If I want to rotate it, I can always use the Rotate tool, rotate it around. And maybe even rotate it a bit down. Maybe I want to change the quality of how the amount of influence that light has, because this is after all coming from the wall. So it's just a bouncing light over here. So what I'll do is I'll select the light, go to its settings. The way you access the settings for that light is by actually going to the light itself, select it, then go to General down here, and here is the amount of intensity coming in from the light. So let's say I bring that down to about 20%, and that brings it slightly down. Same thing from the front. If I want to make a copy of that light back there, this light, I'll go ahead and make a copy and bring it to the front. And maybe I want to reduce the intensity on that one from 100% to say 20, so that I just have some light coming in from the front. Let's make it 30. And with that setup, let me go ahead and file, save again. File, save project. I'll say yes, please. And go back, and you'll see the light changes that have been applied to the car, making it so now I'm trying to match the lighting in this scene with the lights that are coming in from Cinema4D. And as I scrub, let me look at this at different points. It actually looks pretty good. Okay. The last thing I want to do is I want to actually project the shadow. So that's going to force me to change the lights even further. So to project the shadow, let me go back to Cinema4D. Let me turn off the render region. So I don't want to see that anymore for now. And what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and create what we call a shadow catcher, or a plane that is going to catch the shadows being projected by these lights. So to do that, I will go ahead and go into the Create tool, and I will create a plane. Now this by default gives you a plane. It is there and it's tiny. So I need to scale that plane up. I'll do that by using the Coordinates tab under my Properties area. I make sure that I have it selected, which it's selected by default when you create it. Then I'll go to the coordinates, and this second column is your scaling values for that plane. I'm going to make that about 50 times as big, so that's pretty big. I'm going to keep on scaling it up as much as I can use actually my scale tool at this point, and I can go ahead and increase its size significantly. So I'm going to increase it. I'm going to make it big. With that done, I notice that it's right in the middle of the car, so I want to bring that slightly down. So I'll switch my tool to the Move tool, and using my axis constraint, I'll go ahead and constrain it. And then I'll go ahead and start playing with the lights to make sure that I am actually projecting the proper amount of light. Let's start with the first one, which is this one back here, and that one is at 100%. I want to make sure that I turn on the shadows under the shadow option for that light, and I'm going to be using shadow maps for this. Now you have options whether you want shadow maps or ray tracing. It all depends on the quality of shadow that you want to render. In my case, shadow map will be more than sufficient. That's my first light creating influence on the amount of shadows that this is going to project. The second one will be light 1, which is this one. And I'll go ahead and also turn on the shadow on that one, and I'll make it soft maps as well. So I want to see now what this is looking like. So I'll go back to my render button, interactive render region, and then I'll go ahead and go back to my camera. So sorry, to my camera, and I'll choose my 3D tracker camera to see what this is looking like. And I see that this is projecting quite a strong shadow from the light in the back. And that is all due to the positioning of the actual light. The light is too low. If you notice, the light in my composition here is coming from way back there. And it's softened out by all the other influence light that is bouncing off all the concrete around. So you'll notice that the shadows here are very soft, almost invisible. So I wouldn't be projecting that much of a shadow towards the front of the car. It'll probably go about as far as this area here in front of the car. So I need to move the light in my Cinema4D to a position where it's only projecting a shadow that comes all the way to here. So let's go ahead and switch my camera once again to the default camera. And with that done, I'll position it so I can see the actual shadow being projected by that light. And I'll start moving the light until I get it to a place where it's projecting the shadow the way I want it to be projected. So I'll select it. I'll probably get it a bit closer. I will probably get, rotate it a bit to make it point downward. And then I'll move it up on the y-axis significantly. And you can see that is bringing that shadow closer to the front of the car. And that's more like the kind of shadow that I'm looking to create. I might want to move that light a bit back so that I'm projecting more of a feathered shadow. The further away the light, the more feathered the shadow is going to get. So that's one. The other one, as I can see right here, I see a shadow being projected around this area of the car, and that's pretty gigantic. That shadow is coming from this light. That would be light 1 in my case. So I want to move that back, that light. Let me undo that really quick. Let me move it back and let me get a bit closer to it. Perhaps I want to bring that light further up and rotate it down a little bit. so that I get that shadow almost around here. I can see still some of it over here. And in some cases, it's just a matter of how you want the things to fit within the scene. Sometimes a shadow like that might be not perceived by the viewer. So you might be able to get away with it. In my case, I'm going to place it almost at the top of the, on top of the car, not close to it, but above the car, so that it actually is projecting a very minimal amount of shadow in that direction. We then rotate that ever so slightly down and move it right back up a little bit more. Boom. And further back so that I get softer shadows. Let me now switch to my 3D camera tracker camera, and I see that that's more of a softer shadow than what I had before. Let me select that plane, bring it back up just a bit so that it is touching. It seems like my model is, the tires in the back are a bit lifted, so I'm gonna see that light. But that's my actual model, so I would have to rotate the model itself. I would have to go and select this and right click on it and say select all children, which is there, and that selects the entirety of my model. And if I were to move it, then I would be moving the car or rotating the car, and that's not what I want to do right now. So what I want to do is I want to just test this first. Let me save it, Command S or Control S, or File, Save Project, then go back to After Effects to see what this is looking like. And you probably will see now that I'll have a plane appear in my composition here at any moment, and that is the shadows that are being projected. But now the problem is, how do I get rid of that plane? To get rid of the plane, what you want to do is you want to make a copy of the original layer. So let's go ahead and duplicate that layer, Untitled. So now I have two Untitled layers. The top one will be my shadows. Okay, the second one, the one below it, will be the actual car and lights. So to do this appropriately, actually, what I want to do is, let me delete this. I need to separate those elements in Cinema 4D. So to do that, let's go back to Cinema 4D, and I want to create layers here. So I'll go to the right-hand side, click on the Layers tab, and I want to place my car and all its children. So I'll click it again, right-click, and go Select Children. That means everything inside that layer will be selected. And I want to go to Layers, and I want to right-click, New Layer from Object Selection. So if I click on that, what that's going to do is it's going to bring all of those elements that I had selected into that layer. I can see that by turning off its visibility, and if I do, the car and all its elements will disappear if I did it correctly. Apparently I didn't do it correctly this time, so I'm going to go ahead and select it again, right-click, select all children again, then I'm just simply going to drag them into that layer. Now that should take care of that, and I should be able to see this. Let me turn off the rendering option for this. Go ahead and turn off that interactive rendering, and you'll see that the car disappears. If I click on it, it reappears. So with that done, I'll go ahead and, okay, I'm done with that portion of the selection, and that is my layer. I'll rename that car. By double clicking on it, I can highlight it, as you see, and then I'll just rename it car, hit return. Now the next thing I want is to move the plane into its own layer. So I'll go ahead and right click it here. I'll select it. Since it's only one element, I can go ahead and right click here and say New Layer from Object Selection. Now that's my layer for the shadow. I'm going to call that shadow. And just like with the other one, I'm going to check to make sure that it got moved into that layer, and it did. So you'll see that they're separate. The car is in one layer, the shadow is in the other. Lights and everything else remains outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this file again. And now that I have those elements separate from each other, let me go back to After Effects. It's not going to affect anything here. Nothing really happens. All I really want is to work how I'm going to render this, in what passes I am going to be rendering those files in here. One layer contains the shadow catcher, the plane. The other one contains the car. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer, the Cinema 4D layer, in the composition. And then I'm going to select what renders per layer. So the top layer, like I said before, is going to be my shadow, and that is a shadow pass. So for those of you who have worked with 3D, this will make sense. For those of you who have never worked with 3D, when you're rendering elements in 3D, you have the ability to separate things like highlights and shadows and color information, your chrominance and luminance, in separate passes. And so that's basically what is happening. I'm going to tell this layer, just this one, through my Cinema4D multipass, I'm going to activate it, and I'm going to say from this particular layer, all I need you to render is the shadows. So you'll see that you have a whole bunch of other things that you can separate. Diffuse refers to color. Ambient is however the light is influencing. Specular is the highlights. Shadows are shadows. Reflections are reflections. Refractions is how the light bends based on the type of material that you're working on, and so on and so forth. So you have the ability to render all those things separately as passes coming from the 3D program into your compositing program. What that gives you is the ability to manipulate all those channels separately, because as you can see, they become layers inside After Effects. So I want only to use the shadow information for that layer, and I'll click OK. This should turn the layer into a white layer once I tell it, you know what, I only want to see this layer being rendered. And as you can see, everything turns white and the shadow is the only thing. Now I also want to make sure that I see basically that everything, I need to analyze this to make sure that everything else that is not shadow turn into a white area. And you see the reason why once I turn the mode from normal to multiply in this layer. So I'll go ahead and say, okay, I just want to use the dark information here. I'll turn it into multiply, and you'll see that my layer turns from white into whatever it is that I want, into those shadows that I want to use. Now I still see the plane on the one layer below, so I want to get rid of that plane, and that's where your Cinema4D layers come in handy. That's why we went back into Cinema4D and separated everything into layers, because now I have the ability to say, okay, I want one layer to render the car and the lights only. I don't want the plane. So I can go ahead and say, okay, please activate my Cinema4D layers. And when I say set layers, I can go ahead and say, okay, I have the layer car. I don't want to see the shadow, but I want everything else, which is my lights, to remain on as well. So once I click OK, my plane should disappear, my lights and my car will remain, and the shadow is being projected from the layer above, this one right here. So you'll notice that when I turn shadows on and off, they will be there. And that gives you better integration. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that now you're in the compositing program. So you have the ability to control the amount of shadow, whether you want it darker or lighter. You can colorize these things. You can apply adjustment layers and all those things that we can do to the files, because they are, for all intents and purposes, they are After Effects layers. So you can go ahead and control those from in here to get much better results and to get your items to integrate better with your footage if it's necessary. So that is the workflow for how to integrate Cinema4D files into After Effects compositions.